Hey guys, and welcome to today's episode of Give It the Beans. And it's my absolute pleasure to bring to you an old educator friend of mine that I learned a little bit of my craft from about I think 5 years ago. It's Rachel France. How we doing, pal?
Yeah, really good. Interesting times, but the luxury is I get to see you online, which is fantastic.
That's why I knew when there was a lockdown happening. I said, now, for those of you who don't know, Rachel is a very busy lady, and she'll tell you all about it soon. But I knew that if there was one opportunity that I would get to get on the podcast, that everything was pretty much shut. So, listen, I'm going to shut up for a wee while. What I would like you to do is give the listeners a very thorough, detailed introduction, who you are, your journey to date, what sort of biomechanics education Limit is all about. That would be fab.
Well, my history has always really been in movement, even from a youngster. I was at school not academic. I was told that constantly by my teachers, and that's had an interesting impact on me in my journey. But I was always involved with dancing. I was Latin American and disco queen. I would push the sofa back in the front room. And then from about 16 years of age, my mum and dad, who were from dad's rugby and athletics, mum was a contemporary dance teacher. We got into the gym. It was a little gym, interestingly, down in Loughborough, which is just 20 minutes from us. And at 16, I had the gym owner come and approach me and say, "Oh, you should do bodybuilding." No chance. And by the way, I have never performed any bodybuilding competitions, so that never went in that direction. But I was kind of intrigued. Around about the age of 21, I got a phone call to say, "Do you fancy joining us in Greece?" One of these dance girls, they had a dance troupe, broken a leg. I'd never really had any formal training, but I'd stick my hand up to everything. So I found myself over in Crete on the stage learning dance routines. I wasn't that good, but I just, got involved. It was moving. And I came home kind of 6 years later after traveling around Tokyo and Hong Kong, and actually ended up running my own dance agency. So I think that's really where it all changed for me, because it became an opportunity to convert into a living. But at that point, I hadn't realised how much and what direction I was going in. So when I came home, I got involved in the care industry, which again, counselling, caring for others. I was working with disabled and elderly, but that kind of empathic sort of journey really evolved into a lot of what I do now for about 10 years. And during those 10 years, I gathered all my regular qualifications, gym instructor, sports massage. But I got a real fascination for bodybuilding specifically, because I'm talking, this was about 30 years ago. So I'm 52 next year. And so back 30 years ago, bodybuilding, if you were female and turned up, you got a trophy. It just wasn't a thing to be female and to bodybuild. But I loved it. I was fascinated by the way lifting weights had started to change my physique. I was a scrawny kid. I still may see myself as the scrawny kid. But bodybuilding or strength training, which back then it was just bodybuilding, isolation work, you could see the changes happen. I felt good, gave me confidence. And I was watching bodybuilders, you may or may not have heard of some of these, like Susie Curry, who was probably one of the first big female physiques who still looked feminine. So I also really got fascinated by Monica Brandt and Kelly Ryan, who were the fitness competitors back sort of in the late 90s probably. Whereas today in bodybuilding, you enter the female comps, you're in amongst 40 people. It's just, I don't envy the girls now. But that sort of special interest of going to a bodybuilding competition, seeing 10 people on stage at 4% body fat, all doing a lat spread, and they're all completely different. I was like, wow, this is just phenomenal. And it's one of the controversies around judging bodybuilding competitions is you have a genetics that you would struggle to change massively without assistance. And I'm aware there's kind of two sort of arenas to bodybuilding, sort of tested and untested. And I think both have their place. But anyway, we won't get into that too much. But the idea that sculpting the body has certain limitations, and I think that's what we're going to get into, is what can we do within our parameters of genetics. So it started to initiate this a fascination, and I do have a special interest in biomechanics, human movement and the body, but my non-academic background meant that to learn it and eventually teach it, which is what I do now, I had to find simple ways to understand it, absorb it, retain it, and then have a way of making it applicable in a gym. You know, the body is a very complex piece of, you know, subsystems, if you like, we can go into shortly, but bones, the muscles and the nerves and the way they interact make up the body. It's very complex. We can get really complex, but in simple terms, a bodybuilder wants to grow. How do I make the body grow? What are the training principles? Which you will be obviously be able to share with the listeners more than I can about basic training principles over your blogs and your kind of articles and the things you put out. But where I'm interested is where it doesn't work, how we identify that, and then how we help a lagging body part grow or gaining symmetry. So through my interest in biomechanics, I was very lucky to meet a chartered physiotherapist who'd done a whole stack of research from his interest, again, in biomechanics. And as a physiotherapist, he was trained to react to problems that had already happened. And so what he wanted to do was to create a system that actually addressed them before the injury occurred. So he and I worked together, we still do. That was from about 2006. And we developed education from the research he'd done as a physio and in labs and in his gym. And that's what I'm doing now and have done ever since. And it's just grown and grown and grown. And what I've maybe slightly frustrated by is due to the commercial aspect, I've been down the route of sports coaches, training sports coaches and personal trainers in how to apply this model of assessment and improvement, when my real passion and interest is in bodybuilding, which is why I was so excited when you asked me to do this blog. I was like, finally, I can talk about the real niche area that I personally am really interested in. And I've worked with a few bodybuilders from all sorts of arenas and backgrounds and levels that have been on stage and had some stunning results. Anecdotal, yes, but I can share some of those with you, and hopefully the listeners will take away some ideas on how to improve their biomechanics so that when they're on stage, the glutes pop, the hams and the quads have symmetry, upper body, lower body symmetry, which I think we're going to get into. So fundamentally what I do right now, what I'm really passionate about, is educating professionals like yourself, Vaughan, to then pass on the luxury of the information I was taught and have learned over 3.5 decades to be able to help people, both bodybuilders and anybody who just wants to move better, in how to look after their body and, you know, create both aesthetics and health through understanding the biomechanics. So, did I say everything? I've had quite a colourful life, but I'll miss some of it out because it's not, relevant.
You've definitely been through the mill, that's what they say. But I think that one thing that spurred me on to doing your guys' course was I worked with a biomechanics coach in Graham Temple back in 2014, having a lot of issues that a lot of bodybuilders have today. And it was kind of through working with him, those issues became alleviated. I did your course, and again, things got better. And now the issues I had back then, I'd like to say I don't have them anymore. I might still have a lower back, but that's a lower back pump because I'm very heavy and on a lot of food right now versus my glutes were really shit. But what I would say is that I remember sort of from doing the course, and there'll be a lot of listeners out there as well, that I was kind of amazed when you taught me that when one thing in the body's off, everything's kind of off, or something else is off. And this can kind of come down to whether it's pain, whether something's not firing quite as much. But for anyone out there that's kind of heard that statement about, well, Vaughan, what do you mean by that? Could you kind of give a little bit of context of what we kind of mean by if one thing's off, everything else is off?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges in bodybuilding, because it's known as isolation work, so the history of bodybuilding is You want to grow your biceps, you do bicep curls. You want to grow your back, you do, you know, bent over rows, lat pull downs, and that kind of isolated approach to growing body parts. And that is still relevant. But when things go wrong or we don't have symmetry, obviously that can be genetics. We can, you know, there's not a lot we can do about genetics too much. But if there is something in the body that's not contributing to movement, it can impact on everything. So the body is an integrated system. Back when I was a kid, there was the old song, your knee bones connected to your thigh bone. You know the song. And really and truly, that's how the body works. You've technically got 3 subsystems. Let's keep it super simple for any listener. So you've got the bones, the muscles, and the nerves. Bodybuilders tend to have a better knowledge around the muscles. We learn a little bit about the levers, which is the bones. We don't talk a huge amount about the nervous system. So I want to talk about that a little bit. But just to try and give the listeners some examples on how, just to give you an example to appreciate how the body links together, and it might make it a little bit more obvious. So if you think about just the action of walking, when you walk and you step your left foot forwards, generally your right arm will swing forwards, and then when you step your right foot forwards, the left arm will swing forwards. If you tried to walk with the right arm and the right leg forwards, it would feel really odd because the system doesn't work that way. The system works in a kind of a chain of events, rotational, if you like, in the act of walking. And as your heel goes down, there is a shock that goes up through the body, and this sort of system of muscles, bones, and nerves create rotational force that then rotates and swings the upper body, create momentum where we walk. Another simple example, if anybody's listening and has a logo, as you do, Vaughan, on the front of your left t-shirt or chest, if you have one on the front left and you take the bottom right side of your shirt or sweater and just tug it, and you'll see that the logo is moving, but you're not even touching it. And that's almost how the change through the body can influence from one side to the other. To try and make it relevant in a gym, I want you to imagine that you are doing an overhead press. So you're pressing overhead. Now imagine if you were to try and relax your legs and your abdomen. You just let your belly hang out. You were trying to press overhead. You would probably struggle to get the weight over your head because the bracing comes from the feet through the legs. You would soften the knees a bit and then corkscrew the legs into the floor, brace the abs, squeeze the glutes, press overhead. This is why personal trainers, biomechanics coaches like Warren or these guys say these cues to you when you're pressing overhead. Come on, tighten up through the belly, squeeze your bum, press, because it's all interlinked. Anybody who's listening, another great example would be if you're standing, so if you stand up right now, so get up, and it's good for you to stand up, by the way, I'm a movement geek, so everybody stand up, and then if you just roll one of your foot in, roll your right foot in as if you're pronating, and you won't be able to do that without your knee, your right knee rolling in. What will happen as your knee rolls in? Are you doing it?
I'm sitting down and that's happening.
And as your knee rolls in, that right hip will drop down. And as the right hip drops down, your spine will rotate, your right shoulder will come forward, and your left shoulder will rock back. So these are kind of obvious little examples that if as bodybuilders or aesthetic competitors, or however you want to describe yourself, it makes it easier to understand. And through the fascial lines, even when you're doing a bicep curl, understanding how you need to control the movement to be able to do the bicep curl. But I think what you're wanting me to get back to as we go through this podcast is when things are not working, how we can take advantage of understanding the integrated system to improve areas that are not working the way we want them to, right?
Yeah, 100%. I think that the example you gave, like they're very simple. That I have no doubts that when people listen to this, they will, especially my clients, they'll stand up, they'll roll their toe in, or they'll roll the front of their foot, and they'll understand exactly what you mean. And that's what this podcast is all about: is putting stuff across in as layman's terms as we can. I think when it comes to bodybuilding, the nervous system is being spoken about a bit more. I still think it's a bit poorly understood, but people mostly will speak about the autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic, the parasympathetic. They don't speak about the actual nervous system that you know so much about. So I think that, as you said before, what this episode will be about, understanding why we perhaps are experiencing some pain in certain areas, or we can't initiate here what the next time will be hugely valuable. And hopefully, take homes that people can use from this episode to implement into their own training, their journey, and get benefit from that. But rather than me ramble on, and I tend to do that, as you will know, if we continue to fire on and think about it, I think we're just going to speak mostly about the lower body today, just because I'm sure this episode could go on for for hours. So we'll be very, very specific. But knowing that you deal with a lot of clients that have, and particularly, you call that dysfunction, like lower body dysfunction, when a muscle's maybe perhaps not firing or working as it should. Someone that's listening to that's just been going, what the hell does that mean? So if you'd be able to sort of tell the listeners that what's the most sort of common problems you'll see with clients in regards to the lower body, whether it's pain or whatever it is, where do you think it stems from? Like an example I've said is, a lot of us will complain about a sore lower back when we're squatting, but we sit in our butt all day.
Yeah. And I'm glad you've asked me that. And I feel really strongly about this. And you're right, I could talk about this stuff all day. But what I need to do, because of time limitations, is just before I say anything, is come in with a caveat, or a couple of caveats. Number one, if you're in pain, you need to see somebody. Your body is talking to you and telling you need to change something. There is a difference between pain and stiffness, and so identifying which is which would also be important. But pain is good. Pain means that your body is telling you, right, listen, Vaughan, you need to change something. This area here isn't happy. And then it's what we do about that. So obviously, see a practitioner. Do not take anything I'm saying as a cure or as prescription. I will give you some techniques that hopefully you can try out. And if you like, I actually created a video of tests and exercises for a bodybuilder who wanted some help online, and we clarified that there was no red flags first, and I'm happy to share that with you and the listeners. It's just a real simple video, because I think it relates to this really well. So pain is good, but you do need to do something, and it's not just about stretching and rubbing. It can be more complex. In my experience, sort of working with bodies over kind of 3 decades, and that's actually a limited number of years of experience, and it is just mine. What I've found is very often the where you feel the pain isn't where the problem is. If it's an insidious pain, it's crept up over time, you didn't have a car accident and get whiplash. So I'm talking about the regular low-grade aches and niggles that bodybuilders, gym users often say, it's part of the course, it's accepted, yeah? It's common, it's not normal, and you can actually reduce your own discomfort by understanding how the body works as an integrated system. Go and see a practitioner if you feel you need to get tested. But let me give some examples with the lower body. With our lifestyles today, you've highlighted, Vaughan, about sitting. Now, sitting isn't actually bad for you. Any static posture for any length of time is probably not great for the body. The body is designed to move. We are hunter-gatherers who used to run, climb trees, carry saber-toothed tigers, squat on our haunches. And yet now, when you're in a sitting posture, generally you will pretty much always be in 90 degrees at the hip, 90 degrees at the knee, or thereabouts. What you're also doing is you're applying pressure through gravity, pulling your body down and crushing these tissues and structures of the bottom and the hamstrings. That will then press on the nervous system, so you've got a sciatic nerve under there as well, which is another common irritant to moving. And so what happens is the brain says, well, I'm not using these structures, I'm wasting energy, let's put some more ligamentous, I'm trying to keep this super simple, ligamentous lay down in there. We're not using it that much to reserve energy, and so they lose some of their ability to fully contract and relax. I'm going to try and keep this really simple, so that when we get up and we do our deadlifts or our squats and we're trying to do hamstring curls, the glutes, the hamstrings don't feel like they're producing the same sort of power or sensation, or we're not actually getting the growth we want in those areas. And so if we can understand how to address those, that can take pressure off the back, because that sitting posture in a kind of tilted, flexed lumbar position where the pelvis tilts backwards can load the back up, and it gets grumbly, if you like. And the ligaments also get stiff. There's something known as ligamentous creep, which kind of describes that kind of forward round-shouldered posture, stiff thoracic spine, stiff lumbar spine, so that when a bodybuilder gets up, if they have a desk job, actually they may be lifting with a little bit of flexion through the back of the body.
I'm laughing. So, literally just pulled my shoulders back and
just sat up.
Saying, "Dan, that's a bad example."
So, I mean, something really, really simple. If any of the listeners have got a desk job, I'm at my sit-down desk, so I can take the desk up and down. If you don't have a sit-down desk, you can have a box and just put your laptop or your keypad on top of the box, or books, stand up for a period of time, squat down, fidget, move, take regular breaks. That sounds like, oh, what's that going to do? The smallest contributions that are consistent throughout your day will make a massive difference, because the degradation of our variety of movements throughout the day is why you're in maybe the state you're in. And so by just contributing little bits and then doing your training in the gym and some other stuff that I'm going to share with you, you can, over time, gradually really improve the way your body moves. There are common issues, and I think probably pelvic dysfunction, hamstrings, glutes, I think we can talk about, lower back. And I would like to add in, I know this is lower body, but there is a reason why I would like to add in stiffness in the thoracic spine, because there was some research done by a physio, I think it was Paul Chadwick, and he looked at the link, I think it was football, Premiership football, the relationship between a stiff thoracic spine and a stiff pelvis. And if you can get one moving, you can actually get the other one moving through the integrated system. So if you release the pelvis, the upper body can start to become more mobile, or vice versa. If you get the upper body moving, the lower body will move better. So that's a really kind of good, and in practice, I've found that 9 times out of 10 that works. So that's a really good little tip. So I'm just trying to create concepts in there.
Before I continue to pick your brain, someone out there just went, "What the hell's pelvis dysfunction?" They're maybe not too sure what it is. Yeah. So to just pop that across in layman's terms for those listeners that are unaware.
Okay. Now I've got to be careful here, because there may be. I'm also there's a technical aspect to this, and then there's obviously listeners who may not be technicians and may not be trained in the anatomy. So really simply, if anyone's listening, you can sit now, and if you were to cross one ankle over the opposite knee and look at how high that knee is from the floor, and then swap and compare with the other side, if there's a difference, it indicates that one side is stiffer than the other. So that's a really simple test you can do. What is dysfunction? It's when either the joint is stiff, the muscle is not fully functional, or the nerves are tight, or a combination of those. So when you are doing a squat, for example, and you get to a certain point and then your butt winks, which means that as you're coming down, your pelvis tilts backwards. You get to a point where the pelvis tilts under. Now that could be genetics and your hip design, but more commonly it happens too soon because you have dysfunctional muscles that need conditioning, functioning, improving. And then I could teach you some of that stuff, or Vaughan can, or your joints are stiff, or the nerves are tight. And so dysfunction is like a group term for any one of those that are meaning your pelvis doesn't work as fully and productively and to a performance level that it has the capacity for. Yeah. Do stop me if I'm getting too technical.
No, I think that's brilliant, because I remember when when I first heard that sort of back in the day, I was a bit like, what does that even mean? I was like, I'm not good at English. I'm not a smart pants. But how you've broken that down is tip top. Now, a lot of listeners out there will obviously, as bodybuilders, we want to try and get as big as we can for the most part. But if we are thinking about, let's take females for example. A lot of females want to develop their glutes, but I'm sure you'll work with a lot of clients that have dysfunctional glutes, we could say, or you might feel there's some complaints about they don't really feel them that well. They do a leg press or a squat or a thruster, and they'll say it's all quads, and there'll be a lot of like females out there going, yeah, that's me, because I work with them, right? But can you maybe perhaps tell them, well, is there a common reason for? I mean, from everything you just said, there is common reasons, but is going down the rabbit hole more? Is there a further common reason of why that is? A strategy that we could help to improve that sort of muscle connection, or anything that you have to add on that?
Yeah, 100%. There are loads of reasons why. There's genetics, there's lifestyle, there's the idea that it doesn't matter what you feel as long as they're growing. But I guess you're talking about the guys when they feel like they're not growing in the way maybe they should in relation to the rest of the body. So I hear you completely. I'm going to give you two of the most common examples I come across. But again, just with a caveat, these aren't necessarily the root causes of each individual. These are just two common examples. So number one, there's a huge amount of research, which you've acknowledged earlier, in tight nerves or tethered nerves inhibiting muscle function. So the nerves are the software of the body. The brain, the nervous system from the brain, the central nervous system goes down the spine, out through the peripheral nerves in the arms and the legs, and they will tell your muscles through axons and neurons, we don't need to get into that, but the message tells the muscle how much tone or how much to contract and relax. If that nervous system, which is a structure, if you like, there's a sheath, the nerve and the sheath surrounded by the myelin sheath, is pressed, inhibited, if you imagine there's a sticking point, like you sit all day, then if the nerve is tight, the messaging to the muscle is going to be lost. So there's two ways to combat that. And one way is to affect the muscle with things like muscle energy techniques, which you can obviously share with your listeners. There's a whole plethora of them out there, but there's one in particular that I really like, which is the 2020, where you do a 20% effort muscle contraction, hold it for 20 seconds and repeat. And what that does is it's a contraction rather than a stretch, but it's very subtle. And in bodybuilding, it's kind of hard to believe, but you've obviously experienced it. But it just re-engages that muscle into fully contracting, relaxing. If we combine that with a nerve mobilization as well, and this may be where some of the listeners may not be so familiar, is to slide the nerve along its pathway using very slow, low-range nerve mobilizations. Then that will then hopefully reduce that sticking point. So by releasing the muscle, mobilizing the nerve, really low-grade, safe, easy techniques done in the warm or pre-warm-up, and then squatting, they can make the world of difference. So that's one train of thought. Something else that is quite important, that might be quite new to listeners, and I'm going to try not to be too technical here, but there is something they can research. There's something called the law of reciprocal inhibition. So what the hell is that? So that is where, in simple terms, muscles work in pairs on either side of the body. So if you imagine the glutes at the back and the hip flexors at the front, and they work in synergy with each other. And when your glutes contract, there is a law that makes the hip flexors lengthen so that your body can move in the way it needs to. So if the hip flexors didn't lengthen when the glutes contract, you get injured. So it's something that the body just does naturally. Same with the bicep curl, the triceps lengthen, and vice versa. So this law means that if one side of your hip is problematic, and let's say it's the hip flexors, because we sit a lot, and the hip flexors are overengaged, tight, short, dysfunctional, they can inhibit what the glutes are able to do, because they're sending a message through their contraction that the glutes are, supposed to lengthen. I hope, did that all make simple sense?
Yeah, it does to me.
Okay.
Yeah, it does to me.
So that then the consideration of affecting the hip flexors to then grow your glutes, that's another really great technique to kind of consider, maybe a reason why the glutes aren't growing.
Yeah, I think that if anyone's listening on, say, Apple Podcasts or whatnot, watch this on YouTube, because that little demonstration you've done with your hands there, visually, if you're a visual learner, you will get it straight away. But if you're just trying to picture it without much education on anatomy, people will struggle. But how you doing that there was spot on. And I can really, I always will back you guys up, because I worked with Graham, and everything that you said we identified and I done, it worked. And I went from having really, really sore lower back every time I did a movement, all I felt was in my knees, nothing. To, I would say now, like an RDL is probably my strongest movement, like way stronger than knee extension. And it should be, but at the time, I'd do an RDL and not feel anything with my glutes ramius. And that's why I thought, you know what, of all the people I've got on the podcast, I was like, gotta get Rach on, because you're the one that taught Graham. But 100%, when it comes to, I think, bodybuilders, we're lazy. And we'll admittedly say that, right? We'll go 110%, I will say, we'll give it the beans on a hack squat, but we won't see value in doing the little things. But what I hope this podcast will do is motivate people to do the little things like you've said, because the link will be, well, if I do this, I'll grow my butt more. I'll grow my quads more. Whereas I think that even, I can admittedly say that years ago, I would probably be quite hesitant at first when I went with Graham. But then the more I invested in it, the better my contraction became. And I thought, oh, I'm feeling it more. What's going to be bigger?
Yeah, one of the things I really love about bodybuilding, it will display how well your body functions. So when you strip down to, low body fat and you get on stage, and this is just yourself, don't look at anybody else, just thinking about yourself. And what you see, that is representative of your lifestyle. So if you sit on your butt, and this is one of the most common things, is ham-quad ratio in terms of the symmetry. So hams very often lack. And so the tips that I've just given you will also help with hamstring growth. And this is one of the most common things that I've helped bodybuilders with, is bad backs, hamstring growth. And it's everything I've just talked about. But the exciting thing for me, it's exciting and frustrating, is exactly what you just said. It is very, very simple to improve your physicality and then see it on stage. I've done it over and over with bodybuilder clients, and I've seen it, and sorry, that sounds really arrogant. I haven't done it. I've passed information on, and they've done it because they've done all the work. But even just by mobilizing the nervous system, and literally the first session, and this guy, I never saw him, this was over lockdown, he's in fantastic shape, and I don't have his permission, so I can't give you his name, but he was just asking about hamstrings. And this guy's phenomenal, huge, over 90 category, beautiful physique, hamstrings slightly lagging, and I literally gave him the 4-sign 2020 technique I've just described, hamstring nerve mobilization, and isolated knee flexion loading. And again, I've got this in a video, so I'm happy to share it with you. And the first session he did, he said, oh my God, he said, the pump I've got in my hamstrings is ridiculous. And he literally just did 2 or 3 little techniques just before he deadlifted, and did some knee curls, like standing knee curls. And he's now telling me that they're growing. I've not seen the evidence. I've asked him for the evidence. So you're absolutely right. But I think another thing that's really cool about these techniques that you can obviously share with them more and more are, you can actually do it while you're sitting at the desk. It doesn't have to eat into your gym time. And if you do them between sets, you can actually, instead of a recovery, you do a muscle energy technique. So effectively, it shouldn't take up any time.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Is that how you use them now? I don't know.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that I'll admit that I'm out of a way of doing them, but I see value in them, having had experience of doing them before. I'll just do them when I see fit. Whereas before I ever did them, I didn't know what my glutes were. It felt like to fire.
Yeah.
Whereas now, I can put 240 kilos on the bar, do an RDL, and it's all glutes and zero lower back. So those little things for me that I'd done years ago, I've identified why they should be done, and 100% should be done, especially if someone is experiencing, as you said, lagging, body part pain, etc., etc. But if we were to continue, because I know that we're on the clock here, but if we were to continue to talk about lower body, there's a lot of guys out there, and females as well. They don't just want a big butt; they want jack quads. But a common complaint will be sore knees, sore knees, sore knees, sore knees, and it was for me as well. It was one of the things that stopped me. I pushed through it because I was just stubborn, right? But I sort of put up with it. But maybe there's people out there that don't want to put up with it. Out of everything you've just said, and again, I know you'll maybe give a caveat and whatnot, the common things that you see within knee pain, within bodybuilders, do you think it's a case of maybe perhaps we're getting too egotistical with the loading and we're not initiating with the quads, or do you think it's to do with dysfunction?
I think it relates back to a lot of what I've said already. And in the clinical world, the knee is known as the middle sister. It's very rarely the cause of its pain. The pain is often caused by the force coming from problematic feet or footwear. There's this trend now to not wear shoes. And that's okay for some people, but for others, it really isn't. So just because Barry's doing it doesn't mean that Dave should do it. And you've got to get assessed for that. And then from the top, obviously everything we've spoken about coming down from the pelvis, the spine, the shoulders, the descending force into the knees can also contribute to knee pain. And again, I think you mentioned before we started this about sort of quad growth as well. So I just want to tie this all together for the glute growth, quad growth, sore knees, because it all interlinks. And these are really common issues that you've brought up. So I snapped my ACL back toward 11 years ago and went through rehabilitation. I hadn't had any knee pain actually, but the loading going through my knee was because of my flappy feet, if you like, my joints loose in my feet and a dysfunctional pelvis upper book. I think it's a hypothesis, but and so the training that I then needed to do would mirror what somebody with knee pain might consider doing. Now, again, the caveat, as always, is if your knees hurt, go and see somebody, please. Get your feet assessed, get your pelvis assessed. But one of the most common misunderstandings is what I mentioned earlier about this relationship between agonists and antagonists. So an agonist is the muscle that you're training, the one that's contracting. So let's take the quads as the example. So when the quads are engaging, when you're knee extending, so you're sitting in the leg extension machine, then the hamstrings need to lengthen, and this relationship. If your hamstrings are a problem, they can inhibit the growth of the quads. So if you want to grow your quads, sort your hamstrings out. You want to sort your hamstrings out, sort your quads out. There's a little bit of a thing there. The most common problem is sitting on the glutes and hamstrings and the nerves. So that first sort of caveat of do the muscle release on the back of the body, mobilize the nerve, and then work both sides. What we've got to consider as well is what's known as the quad to ham ratio of strength. So quads should, in a well-functioning lower body, be 100%, if you like. The hamstring, should be 70% the strength of the quad. So quads should be stronger. Hamstrings should be around about 70% the strength of the quads. Now, you could argue subjectively, sitting on a leg curl, leg extension machine and checking the weight and working it out, but it doesn't always work that way because it's not a lab, it's not an evidence-based way of doing it. In simple terms, you'll know the quad dominance test where you jump forwards, and it's a hopping test. Again, I can send you the video of this test, and it will identify if your hamstring strength ratio is down in relation to the quad strength. And while it's a dynamic test, it is a good indicator of there being a lower, like say 50 or 40% ham to quad ratio of strength. What that means is the pull on the knee from the quads and the hamstrings will be off. The quads will be pulling too much, more than their comparative 70 to 100. And if the quads are pulling too much, they insert into what's known as the patellar tendon, which is the tendon that goes down into the knee. If the quads are pulling on that tendon more than they should in relation to the hamstring, it can give you a sore knee. Yeah. So that's a simple way. Just something else I would like to mention, then going back to the ACL injury, which again it can be quite common, or any knee issue, is what's known as frontal plane stability. So for the listeners, sagittal plane, if you put your arms out in front of you, that is the plane of action straight forwards and backwards. I always remember that because of the Sagittarius, the horse, the lower body horse. Anyway, so squatting is a sagittal strength move. Deadlift is a sagittal plane strength move. There's a lot of training through the sagittal plane, even pulling. Frontal plane is if you put your arms out to the side of you as if you're doing like a crucifix shape. That's the frontal plane. So if you take your arms in and out, or if you sidestep to the right and the left, that's the frontal plane. If a bodybuilder doesn't apply strength training principles in the frontal plane, they can lose power or strength in the sagittal plane, because the body needs to be stable in a squat in the frontal plane as well, side to side, because as your foot it comes down, your foot's trying to stabilize you. If you lack strength in that direction, you won't be able to squat and deadlift as much. So yeah, okay, it may be a seated abductor machine. I don't know about egos these days. I think they're coming down in that sort of aspect because of in relation to function and reducing pain. But frontal plane strength work, so abduction work, whether it's a machine or a band or using body weight, strongly recommend it. It can improve your squat and deadlift kilo performance.
I'm glad you said that, because even I do the seated abduction. You know, so but you know what? See, 4 or 5 years ago, you never really got me on that machine.
Well, let me give you a tip. Sorry, I've just interrupted you. But what I really like to do is try and think of a machine outside of the box. So if you're listening, if you imagine a seated abductor, tell me how you use it in a minute. But imagine kneeling on it and facing the pad, the seat at the back, putting your feet in it, and then pushing the pads with your feet instead. It maybe doesn't look so girly. I don't know. How do you use it? Do you just sit on it?
I just do it the normal way. Yeah. The other way that you suggested, I don't tend to program it in. I'll just tend to program it in. Just sit in and say, just get strong as you normally would.
Yeah.
But 4 or 5 years ago, I mean, I guess I wasn't the only one that would kind of think, those machines, those are kind of like, those are female machines. Whereas now, I'm kind of like, I've got a pin extender on that. I've got another 20 plate. I'm like, yeah, let's fucking see if we can get the biggest adductors out there. Because on stage, I think it shows when you someone with awesome legs got awesome adductors. Whether that's because they've done fucking loads of seated adductor, or whether they just genetically grow, like ridiculously, I'm not too sure. But it was one area I neglected for a while, and I'm not doing it anymore. The reason I neglected it was because of my restrictions at the and I did a lot of work with Graham. When I do like force sign, my knees are just up here. But my glutes and hamstrings are the strongest they've ever been, and I don't get pain elsewhere. So it then restricts how much I can move the adductor out. Whereas I can jump on a cable and do like a cable version where I attach a cuff on a quad and can go that sort of range. So I think I do it, and there's a lot of male bodybuilders that do it now because of some of the top influencers from years ago that have amazing legs, posted videos of them doing the seated adductor. But that's a whole different story. But one thing I wanted to do, especially because you've mentioned about an ACL tear, we know that there's a lot of listeners that from bodybuilding come from sport where they've maybe had an ACL tear. And it's something that I remember sitting in London and you were talking about it, and you were speaking about, you asked the surgeon if there was attachment, and then when they said yeah, you said no. So I just thought, if there was anyone out there that has this, what seemed to be a devastating injury, just do you have a little bit of sort of advice from them, how you can work around that if they're in a similar position?
Yeah, all the stuff we've said up to now, let's go back and listen to all of that. I'll answer your question in a second, but just remember the ab and adductor machine, 2 of your 3 glutes are abductors.
Yeah.
So, just to layer that in. And also, sorry, I could say so much. If you have groin strains, hernias, your adductors need strengthening if possible. So your ab and adductor strength should have a ratio of 1-to-1. And this all relates to ACL. So yeah, I snapped my ACL. I was training for my first full marathon, the New York Marathon. My distance has always been half marathon. I'm more of an endurance athlete, even though I like playing around with metal and rubber. And I was at my absolute peak of fitness. I was doing my training run of 22.5 miles was the longest I've ever run at speed, and I was doing that at around a 6.5 minute mile pace, which was just obscene for me because I'm such a slow twitch, muscle fiber genetic human being. So I was really finely tuned, I think, and I think I was getting overconfident. And I was teaching a martial arts class, and I did a jump roundhouse kick. And when I landed, my left knee went in the sort of inward direction, and I fell to the floor. And it didn't hurt, so I just stood up, or I went to stand up, and it caved in again. And I thought, oh, that's not right. Still didn't hurt, went to stand up again, it caved in again. All right, okay, there's something really wrong here. And within 40 minutes, I was with Martin, my physio colleague, in floods of tears. He said, yeah, you snapped your ACL. So the ACL is one of your 5 ligaments in the knee. It's in the center of the knee, and it crosses with the PCL. So ACL is anterior cruciate ligament. So some of you listening may be familiar with it. You can survive without that ligament. I have survived since 2009 without it, and I opted not to have surgery. And I'm not saying that that's for everyone, but just to give you insight into my journey, just briefly, I did all the rehab, predominantly knee flexion, so extension of the knee first to get the swelling down, knee flexion work, and this comes back to growth, knee pain, and all the other stuff we've spoken about. I cannot advocate enough loaded knee flexion. So I'm talking about get your hips flexed, get on a seated leg curl machine, and then get bent over as far as you can and leg curl. So really lengthen those hamstrings after the other stuff we've talked about. So I worked on that. I was on a treadmill after 5 weeks. I was obviously swollen and, trying to get that down as much as I could. After 10 weeks, I was off crutches, and within a short space of time, I was back to teaching classes. Now, I knew that the knee was different, and weirdly, the most important thing to me was kneeling on the floor and being able to sit on my heels, because I knew if I could do that, then I could do all the things I wanted to do. So I did it in the August. I went to see my surgeon on the 20th of December that year to have the surgery on the 23rd. And I'd asked all the people I knew, should I, shouldn't I? 50% of people said definitely do it. 50% of people said definitely don't have the ACL reconstruction. I did lots of research. I'd obviously really, really gone all over the rehab. And when I went to see him, I said, okay, let's have a look. Now, he showed me the MRI, and I had a very tiny attachment of my ACL onto the PCL. And he said, it could mean there's a bit of proprioception. I said, whoa, right. So you're saying I've got some connection between the pathway, the neural pathway? He said, yeah. I said, right, I don't want the surgery. I want to see if I can train. He said, fine. He said, I'll tell you what, come back in March. So I said, I'll do that. And I said, if I could run a half marathon before March, I'll be saying no thanks. He said, fine. So I went away, carried on the rehab. Now, I wasn't back to normal by any means. My knee was still uncomfortable. It was stiff. I couldn't do certain things. It hurt occasionally, but I rehabbed. I did all rehab. I ran a half marathon in around, I think it was just under 2 hours, 10 minutes under 2 hours with my brother. So I went back in the March and I said, look, I don't want to have the surgery. And the one person who helped me make that decision myself, because you own your own body, nobody should be telling you to have surgery or not, they can advise you. One person said to me, it was Martin actually, you could come out worse than you go in. Yeah. And that was really profound to me, because I got to a point by the August to the March where I actually felt quite good. I was teaching classes, I was running, you know, and I thought, do you know what? To go through surgery and then go through all of that again, he was going to do hamstring graft, which meant I would lose some capacity in my hamstrings through the rehab, but the hamstring graft over the patella graft is preferable these days because you're less likely to suffer knee pain when you're kneeling, is the experience that he told me, the surgeon told me. So I said, look, you know, I'm going to leave it. I want to see how I get on. And the surgeon said, it's an open appointment. And that was in March 2010. And I have no, it probably took me a total of 18 months to feel normal and get onto my knees and get my butt onto my heels. And I have no qualms that I made the right decision. Some people do need the surgery though. If your knee keeps giving way, then there's a chance you might need the surgery. I had a lot of help for free from my physio mate, but I stuck to the research. I did my research. I stuck to the exercises and the rehab, did my research, and then looked at my options and made a decision based on I could come out worse than I go in. I thought, right, I'm just going to keep going.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's great because it is quite common in maybe not perhaps bodybuilders, but I know that a lot of bodybuilders become bodybuilders because they've been involved in some sort of sport. And in sport, it's harrowing, but it can be a career-ending injury for a lot of people, and maybe they pick up bodybuilding from it. So thank you for your experience on that. Now, one thing I always like to do with the guests that come on, this doesn't need to be related to bodybuilding, doesn't need to be related to anything to do with fitness, is just if you were able to share with us just the biggest lesson in life that you've learned to date, and maybe from that, any advice you would give anyone out there, what would that be and why?
It sounds super relevant right now, and it might sound kind of fluffy, but under the current circumstances, a couple of things that really sort of have always stuck in my mind and I always come back to. It's really simple. It's a really small world and life is really short. So be kind to as many people as you can, and it does come back to you. And that can be in many forms. In the way I express it is trying to share things that have helped me to see if I can help others. And by doing that, things come back to me. And it could be business relationships. It could just be somebody sent me an email this morning saying how much some of my anatomy blogs are really helping her through lockdown. And that makes me feel good. And it might sound like it's a selfish thing, but sharing kindness, particularly right now. So small world, life is short, be kind.
I love that. Now, someone out there might want to see these vlogs, or they might want to get in touch with you, or, you know, check out your Instagram handle. So could you tell the listeners perhaps where they could do that?
Yeah, any professionals out there who are personal trainers or body workers of any kind, www.biomechanicseducation.com is my website. For non-professionals, Instagram is still at biomechanics_education, and I try to share as much positive vibes and movement ideas as possible. Facebook, both Biomechanics Education is the business page, and then my own page I'm happy to share is now, I got married during lockdown, Rachel Francis Thompson.
Congrats.
So you can find me in there. Thank you.
I get married in 2.5 weeks. 3.5 weeks, yeah.
How exciting.
Yeah.
And so you have got the excuse of only having 2 guests.
We're allowed 20, but even that was a struggle to get it down. That's brilliant. I didn't know that before coming on this podcast, so congratulations. But
congratulations to you as well.
I guess I should say congratulations from the listeners, but also thank you for all the knowledge bombs that you have dropped for them out there. I know that from this they'll go away, they'll maybe perhaps have a different way of thinking. At least I hope they do, because I was very sort of naive in my thought process years ago. I would look at that stuff and go, nah, I'm not going to do it. But at the same time, those sort of techniques and what you described and said helped me grow my glutes and quads and hamstrings and what I'm known for today. So I guess a massive thank you from me as well.
Yeah, final thing, if anybody wants to ask me anything, I do a live biomechanics Q&A across all of those social media platforms every Wednesday at 12 o'clock. And so if they want to ask me anything, I do it visually, so I can teach techniques. Then just get in touch.
Fantastic. That's awesome. So for everyone out there listening, please do go watch those lives. But I think I speak for me and Rachel when I say wherever you are, whatever you do, give it the beans.